Hello and welcome to another Virgin Radio Classic Artist, and I am delighted to welcome a man who's had his finger in more pies than a baker. It's Mr. Midge Ure. How are you, sir?
I've never quite been described that way before, but I'm very well, thank you very much.
The reason I kind of say it like that is because, you know, obviously I grew up knowing you through a few of your kind of guises and your outlets, which we'll talk about in a sec, but upon kind of like, you know, over the years done some research and read about you and kind of got to know a bit more about your career, there was a point in kind of, I guess, the very early 80s, late 70s, where you kind of, if something was culturally shifting and kind of defining music, you were there. Somewhere in there was Midge Ure. That was crazy.
Like a bad rash.
Well,
It's sometimes you just find yourself in situations. You know, there was no plan.
Yeah.
You know, you don't sit down when you're 18 and have a big sheet of paper and go, right, well, I'm 22, I'm going to do this, then I'll join that band, and then I'll go here. Things unfold, and you know, I've always been interested in a variety of different things, not just the music.
Yeah.
The music's the core, but all the other stuff, all the periphery, which is normally dealt out to other people, I've always been really proactive on. So.
Yeah. I mean, for someone that, I guess, you know, do you ever stop, you know, someone that grew up in a tenement in Scotland, and all of us, then you turn down being the singer of the Sex Pistols, then you find yourself in Visage, then you find yourself in Thin Lizzy, then Ultravox, at one point, all three at the same time.
Yeah, again, as I said, it wasn't planned.
And then for dessert, you went and wrote the second biggest selling song ever in the history of ever. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's the sort of stuff you write down when you're 10, you know, when you're doing an essay, you know, what I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
And you say, you know, I want to win £1 million and I want to do this and I want to, you know, it's just fantasy stuff, you know, stupidly lucky.
And so let's go back then, because your musical kind of catalogue is pretty avant-garde. You know, you're quite a creative and artistic. You know, you've always been interested in the theatrics of music and presentation. Where did that stem from?
I think that from having nothing, you know, as you said, I was born in a tenement slum in the outskirts of Glasgow. I mean, we had a television, I presume, but the radio was the big thing. So radio took you out of the reality of what you were. You know, music did that. It's a fantastic escape route. You don't have to go anywhere. It all happens in your head. So imagination was always a big thing. You know, it's fortunate, I suppose, that I was born in Scotland. Career-wise, it was unfortunate I was born in Scotland, because if you wanted to be in the music industry, everything was London-centric, or Liverpool-centric, or Manchester-centric. So in Scotland, it just didn't really happen. So the fantasy of being in the industry at some point, being allowed to write and record and, you know, go on television and go on tour.
Getting down to London at that point must have been a bit of a pain.
Yeah, yes, it was. I mean, it was 1,000,000 miles away, and they could still have had Hadrian's Wall built for all that mattered to us. You know, I didn't go on a plane till I was my mid-20s. Yeah. So the idea of going all the way 400 miles to London, you know, and what
just with a demo tape,
to be seen. No, we couldn't even do a demo tape. We didn't have any studios. Wow. So it really was an odd thing. So fantasy and imagination was a major part of it, and a massive amount of luck sprinkled on top of that.
And what was it? What song was it that you heard on the radio that kind of first lit that spark, where you kind of went, you know, was it Bowie? You know, there must have been something where inside little James's head.
Yeah, little James's head. Well, as I said, music was always there. I remember an instrumental track called Sleepwalk, which must have been in the mid-50s sometime. I was born in 53, so it must have been the mid-50s, when I shouldn't have been remembering music. And that, to me, just had a beautiful atmosphere. And that is I can still hear parts of that, the essence of that, in what I do today, so it stays with you. And like any musical influences, there isn't just one.
Yeah.
You know, you discover the small faces. You think, fantastic, little guys can play music as well. And then you discover the Beatles or Bowie or Roxy Music. And then you discover what's happening in Europe. And, you know, you find the British blues boom. So all of these elements all kind of come together. And what comes out at the end of it, you are the sum of your influences.
Yeah.
You know, be it your parents or your school or your friends or music or films or books or whatever. And what pops out makes you the individual you are. So.
And did you see music as just something that you needed to do for your creative kind of urge, or was it kind of like, this is my escape?
I could always sing. It didn't cost anything to sing. You know, I had a voice long before my parents could scrape up the princely sum of £3 to buy me a guitar, and then I taught myself. So the singing part of it was always there. This fantasy thing going on, but the reality was the chances of getting into the music industry then in the 70s, early 70s or whatever, incredibly slim. You know, the reality was I was going to be an engineer, you know, have a skill, a trade at my fingertips.
You went to technical college.
I went to technical college and I started an apprenticeship as an engineer. But all the time playing in bands at weekends. Bands, you know, being in a band was something you did with your mates. You know, if you were into football, you went and played football with your mates at the weekend. I went off and made a racket with my mates.
And it was a job in band, so it was covers, was it?
It was covers. You had to do covers.
Yeah.
I mean, the weird thing about the Scottish music scene, if you look back at it now, there was no pub rock circuit. You couldn't play a pub and get paid. Because the licensing laws were run by the church, and so they dismissed this. So you weren't allowed to do it. So there was no pub rock circuit. Even great bands like, you know, Tear Gas, who were the original sensational Alec Harvey band, had to go and do covers. You know, they were playing the same town halls I was and playing the same top 40 songs. So there was nowhere to cut your teeth. So it left you like when it came to doing your own stuff, a little confused, to say the least. So you started off by parodying who you were listening to at the time.
And what was the first kind of fork in the roads for you then? How did you get from, you know, playing with your mates in a covers band at the weekend to being offered the Sex Pistols gig by Malcolm McLaren? How on earth did you get from A to that B?
Well, there's a little bit in between, yeah. As I said, playing in bands, weekends. Halfway through my apprenticeship, there was a keyboard player in the band that I was in at the time who we didn't like very much, and he wanted to go for an audition with a much bigger band in Scotland, a professional band in Scotland. And I went with him to try and get rid of him. And they asked me to play guitar while they auditioned him, and then didn't take him and asked me if I would join the band as a guitarist. Yeah. So I joined the band as a guitarist. The singer left after a couple of years. I left the apprenticeship halfway through. I took over vocals, and we changed our name from Salvation to Slick. We were heard by Bill Martin, then songwriter Bill Martin, who wrote all the Bay City Rollers things. He heard us rehearsing in a room, doing Sparks, This Town Ain't Big Enough for Both of Us, and he thought it was the record. And he saw this bunch of young guys and said, "Okay, we'll have you, thanks very much." And we signed a contract thinking we'd be able to do our own stuff eventually. It never really works out that way. Yeah. And as I was walking around the streets of Glasgow, bearing in mind that there were no rental companies. You couldn't, if a band came to play the Glasgow Apollo, the big gig, and a part of their equipment broke or they needed to borrow a guitar or something, you couldn't do it. You couldn't just phone up a company and they'd come and deliver one like you do today. So the Apollo would say, go round to the music shop. Midge is always in there buying and selling and doing whatever, and ask him. So I was stopped coming out of this music shop in Glasgow by Bernie Rhodes, who went on to manage The Clash. Yeah. And he asked me to speak to his mate round the corner, who was Malcolm McLaren. And he told me about his background and what he'd done, and he said he was putting a band together. Did I want to join the band? But he hadn't asked what I did. So I've no idea whether I was meant to be the singer or the drummer or the guitarist or whatever. Yeah. No, it didn't. Yeah. It was the fact that I had short hair.
That's punk.
I had straight trousers and short hair, and that was enough.
And what there must have been a part of you that it struck me kind of like looking through your kind of discography and kind of reading about you, that you always seem to be like maybe searching for a musical home, because all the different bands and the different people that you kind of paired up with were so different. Was that a conscious decision on your part that you wanted to kind of do as many different things as possible, or were you looking for, I guess, your sound still?
Well, it's, circumstance. Once you signed that contract with Slick and you had your big #1 record, you were forever tarred with that brush. You were dismissed. So even though we were a touring band round the Scottish circuit and had been for a few years, we were put in the same bracket as all the other boy bands at the time.
Yeah.
So it was almost impossible to get out of that. So we ended up breaking the band up. I got the phone call from Glenn Matlock, ex-Sex Pistol. Weird how these things come around. Who had been speaking to music journalist Caroline Coon, who wrote for Melody Maker and stuff. And she had seen Slick play and said, he's the guy for your band, the Rich Kids. So I moved to London and joined the Rich Kids. And about a year into the Rich Kids, after during putting our first album together, I bought a synthesizer, which immediately broke the band in half.
We broke the band in half, and then it went on to kind of pretty much define you for the best part of a couple of decades.
Well, in 1978, it was a bit premature. I mean, I had this idea of incorporating
Do you remember
this.
What kind it was? What was it?
It was a Yamaha CS40.
Yeah.
There we go, 4-note polyphonic, and I couldn't play it. But it wasn't about. It was the punk ethos, but with technology.
Yeah.
You do what you can with it, just like kids used to with guitars. And learn 3 chords. I could play. I'm still playing like that. I still play like a claw, And I introduced this, and it split the band in half. And half the band who liked it, that was Rusty Egan and I. We went off and put a band together, a studio project together, utilising all our favourite musicians, the guys from Magazine and Billy Currie from Ultravox, and Steve Strange fronting it, and it was Visage. So.
And then off the back of that, Fade to Grey kind of comes in and just wows everybody.
Which was an oddity, because we were really only making music to try and play in the clubs that Rusty and Steve were running in London at the time. We were listening to a lot of what was coming out of Europe, a lot of Kraftwerk and La Dusseldorf and Neu and Cannes, and mix that up with Roxy and Bowie and all the stuff that we'd been influenced by. And we wanted to make new European dance music. Nothing to do with dance music coming out of America.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with jazz or blues or soul or funk or whatever.
Yeah.
This was strictly European.
Harsh.
And then to find ourselves with a hit with this thing was a bit odd.
What was the musical, the kind of the writing and recording process like back then? Because I think a lot of people take for granted nowadays. You can pretty much do anything on a laptop in half an hour if you've got the wherewithal to do it. But back then, technology was, like you say, it was in such a kind of an embryonic stage, and even getting the sounds from a keyboard to match the tempo of the drum machine could sometimes take days to kind of master. I mean, and it's a miracle that anything good came out of it.
Well, you couldn't. A lot of it you couldn't do that. One machine wouldn't talk to another. So a lot of stuff had to be played live. You listen to Fade to Grey, and all those keyboard parts in there, all that all played live.
Wow.
It was all manually done. Chris Payne, who was in the Gary Newman band. The writing process was difficult simply because the Rich Kids were still kind of in the dying throes of being together. Magazine was still very much a touring band, as were Ultravox pre-me was still very much a touring band. So we begged, borrowed and stole time in a studio when everyone was in the country at the same time. And we ended up doing it down at Martin Rushent's place, a producer at the time who became famous for doing the Stranglers.
Right.
And he was building a new studio and said, look, all my equipment's sitting in a little hut at the bottom of the garden. We'll get the engineer to plug it all up and just use it. So we did. So every night Martin would come down and see what we were doing with all this pads and electronics and wires. And he figured it all out and went and made Dare with the Human League.
Wow. He took that idea and really ran with it.
He ran with it, big time.
Fair play. He knew what he was
Left
doing.
us all behind, yeah.
Well, if you're gonna lose someone to any album, it may as well be Dare.
Yeah, that was all right. That was all right.
Talk to me about your songwriting, because you can't hold a good song down. But there must have been a point where, were you writing songs and then having to work out who they went with, or how did that work out?
It didn't really work that way at all. Ultravox was my band.
Yeah.
I joined Ultravox through working on the Visage project when Ultravox fell apart, and I joined this broken thing, dropped by the record label Eau de Fortune. Not the kind of band that you would do if you were.
If it was a house,
if it was a house, it was a wreck.
Done.
Absolutely, it was down. But the foundations were there.
Yeah.
And still, because the guys there knew exactly what they were doing. So Ultravox was my thing, and Ultravox, we wrote everything together, all in a room with all the equipment, and we just threw ideas around and created something. Eventually popped out that was a song. Same with the Visage project, really. No, I don't. If I pop my clogs tomorrow, there isn't an excess of songs lying around in a vault somewhere that I've not put out. I tend to write for the moment.
On demand.
You do it. Well, it's on my demand. I do it, and if it doesn't make the grade, it's dumped, never to be seen again.
Right.
So I try and do things and complete them at that moment in time. It's just that, as you quite rightly pointed out, Visage and Ultravox and all of that stuff all came at the one time, or it seemed to come at the one time. Hence the 1980 tour that I'm about to do. It's celebrating 1980, where I had the Vienna album and the first Visage album in the charts at the same time, and it's ludicrous, to have a moment like that.
Yeah. It does not happen.
It doesn't happen, and it doesn't. No matter how much if you tried to organise that, you couldn't. Yeah. It's just ridiculous. Yeah.
And so going back to, like you say, you're about to go on tour next year with the 1980 tour. Next week with the 1980 tour. It will almost certainly be on the road when this goes out. When you look back at that now, and because that was just an incredible album, both not just from musically, but in terms of the videos, in terms of like your look, it was, it's musical folklore now. Vienna isn't it really?
Well, it's again, it's like when the stars align, and you can't control that either. There was a look. It was the Dead Men's Clothes.
I'm so disappointed the pencil-thin moustache has not made a comeback.
It will make a comeback when the rest of it does. But I'm not trying. It was all about Dead Men's Clothes. It was all about recycling before we invented the term recycling. Using the technology. People think about the Vienna album and think, oh, it's an electronic album. Well, it's not. I mean, there's a lot of synthesizer on there. But listen to Vienna, the track. It's a drum machine. It's a piano. It's a violin and a viola. Yeah. And one synth, two synths or whatever. Very simplistic. So it was about the combination of all instrumentation. And as you said, it took 3 weeks to record and mix the whole thing, 3 weeks start to finish. And most of it had to be played manually. Wow. Because that's how it was in those days. And when you have something that isn't absolutely rock solid perfect, sometimes that human frailty comes through, and you create something that you can't create with a perfect machine. There has to be some kind of human feeling to it, and that's what that album had.
It'd be crackers not to talk to you about Vienna, the actual song as well, because all the things you mentioned there, that song encapsulates everything you just said. It's kind of it's the fact that even in just like the tempo change towards the end, and the way that the tempo shifts, that must have just, I can't, even thinking, putting a musician head on, can't get my head around how frustrating that must have been in the studio to kind of to get so right. And like you say, it's the little human elements that give it its heart. But the song itself it's a very emotional song. It's I can remember kind of listening to it in the back of my dad's car and trying to keep up with you, singing it in the back and seeing if I could hold the note for as long as Midge Ure did. And
yeah, I do that now. In the back of the car.
Do you ever regret? Do you regret
all
the key
the
you
time?
wrote them in?
Yeah. I wrote everything in stupidly high keys, not thinking you'd still be singing them, 35, 40 years later. But it's fine. You know what? It was a combination of ideas, the right combination of people. People have said to me recently, have said, oh yeah, when you joined Ultravox, you took it in a different direction. No, I didn't. When you join a group of people, the dynamics change.
Yeah.
It was a 5-piece band, and all of a sudden it was a 4-piece band, and that dynamic changes. Luckily for us, for the better.
Yeah.
And I will not hold my hand up and say I did that.
No.
We did that.
Yeah.
And it was just the right place at the right time. And of course, the advent of the video clip. The pop promo. I remember the record label saying, "Oh yeah, we'll stick you in front of a video camera," and we said, "No, we don't want it in video. We want it in 16mm film. Yeah. We want to make a little movie. We want to see this."
I want a raincoat, goddammit! Yeah.
I bought that with the first ever money that I ever made. I went to Burberry's. There are other raincoats available,
but it's not as good.
And I spent a lot of money buying that raincoat, which I still have. Being Scottish, I'm getting my money's worth out of it.
And famously, it's one of the most famous number twos of all time. One of the most kind of criminal acts in musical history was that it was held off the top spot by Joe Dolce of all songs.
Yeah, for part of the time. Yeah, and also John Lennon had just been shot as well, so
you know,
they went to number one as well. Yeah. So ridiculous to sublime, or vice versa.
So you found yourself, I guess. What was it like being Midge Ure at that period then? Because throughout there was kind of like a period of about 3 or 4 years where it didn't seem like you could do any wrong.
It was, I had the keys to the toy box. I was allowed to do whatever I wanted. It's a weird anomaly that kind of happens, maybe, or happened only in the music industry, that if you become successful with something musical, I'd go into the record label and say, well, I want to direct the next video. And they go, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Never directed anything in my life. But because you'd achieved or attained some level of success at one thing, they instantly just thought, well, we're not going to upset you. So yeah, you go and do it.
Yeah.
Give me a budget of 25 grand and go off and make a little mini movie.
Your videos, I mean, your videos were brilliant. I mean, again, If I Was, which you're going to play for us, was pretty groundbreaking as well, wasn't it? With the whole pin
matrix.
Pin matrix thing.
Well, I saw the pin matrix in Los Angeles. I saw it in the first one I'd ever seen, tiny little thing, a desk toy.
Yeah.
You stick your face in it and it sits on you, like an executive toy. And I just saw the possibilities. And I thought, wouldn't it be great being able to do kind of some weird stop motion type thing with that, where your face in this thing looks as though it's singing. And then we found one that I think it was the Royal Opera, someone had used, that was 6 foot by 2 feet. Wow. And old money. And you could put your entire body into it. So we got hold of that and then figured out ways of being able to film this thing and use it. It's a little bit creativity.
Yeah.
I think I'd learned at that point that, trying to make a video that had a conclusion with a storyline, it was a waste of time, because the video, you'd only ever get like a minute or two of it shown on television. So the punchline would never be seen. So I learned very quickly on that you had something that had a feel or a look or an image that went all the way through the video.
Yeah.
And it gave a tone for the thing. And then you get 30 seconds shown and it's fine.
What was it like going solo? Did it feel quite lonely?
Yeah, it was weird. I have to say, I thought it would be really, really enlightening. Because I'd been working. I'd already done the Gift album, which is my first solo album, that had If I Was on it, and I'd worked with Mark King from Level 42, and Mick Karn from Japan, and Mark Bazicki from Big Country. This wealth of musicians. I thought, this is fantastic.
Great drummer.
Wonderful drummer, and and it was like your musical muscles were being expanded a little bit. It felt like,
yeah.
And when I stopped Ultravox and went off and started doing this as a full-time thing, I realised very quickly it's two different things. Putting out a solo album under the auspices and the umbrella and the safety net of Ultravox, being part of Ultravox, and a totally different thing not having that safety net.
Because you can share the burden.
Well, you walk out and it's different. It's, the first solo record, I didn't intend to do it. I'd built a studio at the bottom of my garden. I'd done this in my spare time.
That's how Phil Collins, that's how Face Value came about.
Right, there you go.
Yeah.
You'd knock these things together.
A bloke with too much kit in his shed.
Too much time in his hands, I think, yeah. As an antidote for the complexity that Ultravox was getting into, I wanted to do something that was really simple and poppy and instrumental and whatever. So by the time the second album came out, I thought, oh, hold on a second. All of a sudden it's me. It's not we. It's I think. It's not we think. It's what I do. It's not what we do. And that's a weird place to find yourself, because it's like snakes and ladders. All of a sudden you find yourself sliding right down to the bottom of the snake, and you're kind of starting all over again.
Yeah.
And it took me quite a while to find my feet, but sculpting the songwriting side of things in a very different way, which was a good thing for me, I think.
And now obviously we can look back at this kind of soundtrack box set, which is it's fantastic. It's got, I mean, like you say, we were talking before we started recording that quite often these box sets kind of crop up without really your knowledge or your involvement, and can be quite a frustrating kind of aspect of being part of a record deal. But with this, it's been a bit of a joy.
It's a bit like somebody raiding your photo album and putting all the photographs that you don't like
Where you're half
together
blinking, yeah.
and then publishing it, you know. This, on the other hand, is different. This is very hands-on. It's a beautiful bit of packaging. We spent a lot of time, a lot of effort behind this to pick what I thought were some of the more interesting tracks.
Yeah.
You know, it's still the age-old question, you know, what's the favourite song you've ever written?
Yeah.
And it tends to be, and it changes all the time, but it tends to be the ones that weren't commercial successes.
Yeah.
Because they tend to be more interesting. They tend to not fit
and
the format.
you've not overheard them.
And you haven't overheard them. And sometimes, and even me, I go back and I listen to them now and again, like for doing this, and I thought, oh, that's actually quite a good song. I didn't think much of it at the time, but it's grown up the way I have, you know, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
So I've kind of cherry-picked the ones that I wanted on this.
And you know, I mean, one aspect of your songwriting career that we can't not talk about is obviously Band Aid, which is a joy that's been bestowed on so many people. That must be incredibly proud of that, because it's not your favourite. You've gone on record saying that it's not your favourite song
It's
you've
a
ever
weird
written.
song. It's a strange.
Love it. I love it.
But if I could write more like that, it'd be great, because I wouldn't have to think about choruses, because there's no chorus in it. You know, it's like it's just
it's one big climb.
It's a wedge, isn't it? It starts at the pointy end and goes to the thick end, and it just keeps going. And if you listen to it now and don't think Band Aid, just listen to the music. I'm playing all the instruments except the drums.
Yeah.
It's like an Ultravox tune.
Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same sounds. It's the same process. It's
what would Ultravox be like if Phil Collins was drumming on it? There you go. It's Band Aid. Yeah.
Kind of, yes.
If there's one moment in pop history that I would have loved to have kind of been a fly on the wall, it would be that day at Psalm.
It's Psalm.
Yeah. I've interviewed quite a few people that were there, and it holds such a very dear place in all of their hearts for many, many different reasons. It must have been one hell of a day.
Well, I think for
Francis
anyone...
Rossi is very different point of view than Jodie Watley, one would imagine.
Yes, a different attitude, no doubt, as well. He was out there having fun. It must, to anyone who wasn't there, it must feel like, you know, when you were in school and you're trying to answer a question in an exam, and the guy next to you's got his arm round his, and you can't see it. Yeah, it's a secret, you know. And it must have felt like that. It was just, for me, a full-on hectic day.
Yeah.
You know, I was as gobsmacked as everyone else when all the artists turned up, because we hadn't really spoken to an adult. You know, nobody had written down where and when it was.
Everyone was there.
We hadn't spoken to a manager.
Bob,
you know,
Bob has said that it's fine.
So they remembered, and they made it on time, and they were there. So I'm just stuck behind the desk for the whole day. You know, I didn't go off and wander and have a bit of fun with everybody else. I was there trying to get this thing not only recorded, but mixed within the next 12 hours or whatever. It was had 24 hours to do the entire thing.
I mean, I think a lot of people take it for granted now because we've seen it so often. You know, that was the blueprint for what we've seen so often, all for fantastic causes, more often than not. But there's a great quote, I think, in one of the documentaries where Phil Collins says that he was absolutely crapping himself having to play drums in front of all these people. And it's like you forget that, like, you know, he was like...
He was the pro.
That's what I mean. It's like, mate, I don't think Nick Rhodes is that arsed. You're doing fine.
He was brilliant. You know, he sat there for about 5 hours. And he kept, his head would pop up above the desk. He go, "You ready for me yet?" And I said, well, 10 minutes yet, Phil. I said, yeah, okay. And then he got behind the kit and played brilliantly. And then he said, "I've overplayed, I'll do it again." Second take, that was it, done. Brilliant. Amazing.
And 2 Ivan Novellos off the back of that. I mean, it is what a leg. What a leg. You look back at things like the soundtrack and the Vienna tour and Band Aid. You must feel very blessed.
Unbelievably, as I said, it's being in the right place at the right time. A huge amount of luck.
But you seem to have marched to your own drum as well.
You know what? I think after the initial. The Slick scenario, where I found myself singing somebody else's songs. In fact, finding myself not being allowed to play on the early songs. Yeah. I vowed never to let myself be in that position again. Never, ever allow yourself to be pushed around and manipulated and be the puppet for someone else's string pulling. You know, and if that means you have to be a bit belligerent or you have to go off in your own peculiar way. I mean, I've had so many people saying, "Oh God, you should be the king of the rave. You should be the king of the dance music and whatever." And I'm saying, I chose not to do it. I don't want DJs remixing my tracks and putting a bass line through it that clashes with all the chords. That's not music to me. It's not what I want to do. So I will choose to do the other route. And if the other route takes me into absolute obscurity, I'll be happy because I can wake up in the morning, look myself in the mirror and go, right, you've done it your way.
And on that, I can't end it any better than that. Midge Ure, thank you so much for being this episode's Virgin Radio Classic Artist. Thank you, buddy.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
The Chris Evans Breakfast Show and the best music. Virgin Radio.